Good evening, and thank you so much for joining the second live broadcast of Loud and Proud, a show where we are talking about the important different topics that go along with disability. I am your host, Nicole Kelly, and I am so excited to jump right in and start with my guest today. My guest today is a 27-year-old who lives in the city of Chicago, where I live. However, she grew up in Sterling, Illinois. Liz Davis is her name, and she is currently pursuing her Master's of Science in Human-Computer Interaction at DePaul University. So we wanted to bring Liz on to talk about web accessibility and what that looks like. Welcome, Liz, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is
fun. It's so exciting to have you here with us. So jumping into you and your expertise, first, can you tell us what your disability is?
Sure. I have sacral agenesis, which is basically my back didn't form properly when I was born. So I use a wheelchair. I'm very short stature, and basically my back just got all messed up as when I was born. So
you have lived from your wheelchair?
Yes, since I was about 5 years old. So
cool. And so you, like I have had to do, have been very familiar with kind of navigating and living in the world in a different way. And you specifically are going to school to kind of change a wild, wild west landscape right now, and that is the internet. So can you tell us who are the people who actually put in rules and regulations for the internet, and what does that look like?
So overall, with the internet or the web in general, there's they're called the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. And they're like a big collective of people that get together and say, okay, these are the standards that everyone's going to abide by, and these are what we're all going to make sure it's global. So browsers are all the same, mobile phones are the same, so everything works correctly. And they have a set of rules called WCAG, and that is specifically targeted for web accessibility. And that's put on this like global kind of consortium. And people, it's not like mandated, but it's generally a good rule to follow these guidelines. And they're generally accepted as kind of the highest level of, rules.
Of what you should be following.
Yeah.
We were sort of talking about how the Americans with Disabilities Act covers many things, but this is yet again kind of that wild, wild west landscape where haven't really been set in place. And what is it going to take for rules to be set in place?
Well, right now, the only thing that gets kind of enforced is through lawsuits, which is kind of what the ADA relies on, is having people saying, oh, no, that doesn't follow this rule, and we have to kind of enforce it ourselves. So a big case that came up was Target was sued because their website wasn't fully accessible. And so they went to court, and they lost, or they eventually settled. But that kind of kicked off this sort of like step back, like, oh, my God, we have to make everything accessible. And so when a company comes to you and say, or when people come to you and say, your website isn't accessible, they can refer to these guidelines to say, okay, what level do I need to be compliant with this sort of guideline?
Sure. So it's starting to form, it sounds like. Tell me.
Awareness is starting to kind of come up.
It's starting to come up. What is this simply for deaf and blind accessibility? And also, what does that look like for deaf and blind? Or is it covering other types of disability as well?
Well, it tries to hit every point. The trouble is sometimes rules can conflict with other disabilities, but the overall idea is inclusion. So we're doing something that works for everyone, no matter their ability. So, for example, if you are blind, you use a screen reader where it reads your screen to you based on the code in the background, okay? And it has certain structure that needs to be in place for it to make sense. And people with these screen readers are very good with them, but if a website's not set up, then it's hard to navigate. So there's certain like technical rules to how to set that up. And so that's generally for just the screen readers, but also you have things like color contrast. People can't always see text if it's really dark, or on a dark background, or really light on a light background, or even just color swatches that don't meet certain rules. You have to have, there's people who can't use a mouse, so maybe they can tap a keyboard with one finger. So they need to be able to tap through your website with just a keyboard. That's another requirement, is your website needs to be fully keyboard accessible. So we try to hit kind of this inclusive sort of mindset. If someone has, poor vision, but they're 23, they have to zoom in their text to see it. That applies to someone who's in their 80s and needs glasses, and they have their text super big. I mean, how many people do you know that have their phone text all the way up to large? And if these websites don't scale accordingly, then they can become completely inaccessible. So it's that idea of inclusion that is what we want.
I love that. Is it much different to make a desktop screen inclusive versus like I am on my phone or a tablet? Is it much one than the other?
When you're doing web development, there's already this sort of mindset out there of responsive design, as the website dynamically shifts depending on what the screen size is. So if you're already following that principle and you're already following the guidelines of the WCAG, those should kind of mesh together. There's certain, kind of add-ons you can do, but generally for WCAG, there's 2 levels. There's, well, 3 if you count unaccessible, but generally you want to hit AA level, which means your website is compliant. Most people can get to it. It's good. There's AAA, which is kind of the optimistic hope of websites, and most people aren't generally required to get to that. But generally, at AAA or AA is where everyone is, and that's, does your screen reader work? Does your keyboard, is it fully accessible by keyboard? Are all the colors correct? Do they meet the ratios of color contrast? Does your video have captions? Do your image tags describe what they are? Especially if it's important. So if you have a click here text in an image, screen reader is just going to blow right past that. But if you have an alt tag that says click here, then they're going to know, oh, that's where I click. Not that you should have to click on a button, but
I literally am likening that to, as silly as it sounds in my brain, that's like a restaurant grading. How compliant is a restaurant?
Yeah, it kind of is.
And so it is this consortium, this World Wide Web consortium, that's giving those grades to the web.
So basically, usually it's like there's certain companies that are out there that audit websites, and they follow these guidelines. So WCAG sets the guidelines, and then an outside company will come in and say, we evaluate websites for accessibility based on their rules. So they're not really enforcing them, but some firms have come up and, I think there's one actually in the city that does it, where they audit certain websites to see if they meet that level. And so as developers, we have to follow these rules and make sure we're up to that level. Because if you get audited, you're already kind of on the edge of a lawsuit, and you don't really want to be there.
Yeah, no, you don't.
No.
So you being in school right now, you're learning all these different rules, you're doing all the different programming. What are you looking to do when you're done with this master's degree? What's the next step?
Well, my program isn't specifically disability, but that's kind of where I'm kind of moving my track towards. So I'm doing a lot of outside work as well. But in the end, like I mentioned earlier when we were talking offline, a lot of developers are still kind of iffy about WCAG for the fact that if you have to go back into a website and do it, it's a pain in the butt. It's just like if you build this beautiful building and you forget to put a ramp, and the only way is to put the ramp in the sidewalk, then everyone's going to be cranky because now you got this huge ramp in the middle of the sidewalk. But if you had just designed the building with a ramp in mind, it's not so bad. And that's kind of what we're seeing with web development. And so I've come across a lot of devs who are either really excited about it or they're just really not into it. And they're cranky about it, and they're like, oh, why do we have to do this? Only like one person's going to use this, when they don't really realize how many people out there that there are. And so my goal is to kind of put a friendly face on that. I was talking to, fellow developers who are interested in accessibility. I was like, if I go to a company, they're going to be a lot more open to me kind of yelling at them, hey, you need accessibility, when there's someone in a wheelchair saying, you need this. Because it kind of like, oh, I know someone with a disability now. I can relate. I might not be blind or deaf, but at least I can be like, hey, we exist and we're willing to help, so you should do this. Because being your own advocate's kind of the best way to go about things. Especially
always in that. I was going to say, always preaching my own advocacy. I love that. So all of that is amazing. I'm wondering more about you and your personal life. I know that you have many fun after school activities. And so will you tell me about, Liz and I actually share our prosthetic guy, David Rotter, our favorite person.
Yes.
And he special things for you. Actually, why does he make those special things, and what do you do that you need special things for?
Well, I play sled hockey, and because of how I sit in my sled, I have an actual prosthetic bucket that sits on some skates. And so he actually molded my body into this bucket, and he does it for a lot of people around the country. He makes the sled hockey sleds that are like prosthetics, so we can skate on them, and it's very, tight and fitting, and it's just perfect. So I know Dave because he made me a sled, and he made you an arm. So, they're just making devices for us. Yeah. And I know Dave made so many different things for people. He's just like, all right, I'll try that. That's what it seems like to me. He's just open to it.
I think that is such an important part of the conversations that we're having here at Loud and Proud, and just kind of as we're going out on our own, you use that word, but just like try it and find out and speak up for yourself, and don't be afraid to experiment in front of others, or to like include others in your experimentation.
Exactly. I literally tell every person I meet about sled hockey. Like every person. I'm just like, I think I've got all my coworkers roped in to come to games. Like everyone just needs to see sled hockey, because for one, it's like the first time you see disabled people like smashing into each other, and the look on people's faces when they're like, what? Why are you hurting yourselves?
For those people who don't know what sled hockey is, will you please elaborate why you're smashing into people? Like what?
Well, everyone knows what hockey is, right? Mm-hmm. So hockey, you checking, full contact sport. It's not shy about its violence. And sled hockey is just the Paralympic version of that. We sit on two skates. We have half-cut hockey sticks with picks on the end to kind of grip the ice, because you kind of move like this. And it's full check. It's full everything. I mean, you can get penalties for elbowing, for teeing. It's just as violent. It's pretty great.
And you were on a team that did what?
Yeah, I play locally in Chicago up north, and then I was also on the USA Women's Development Team for the past 2 years. It got cut this year because of money, of course, but in the future, women's hockey, sled hockey will hopefully be in the Olympics. So that would be a good dream.
To see you in the Olympics. I'm just saying.
I would be like, wow.
So I know I also mentioned this to you. What I want to start doing with my guests who have disabilities is there is this big faux pas around when you see a stranger who has a disability, are you allowed to talk about it? And how do you prefer people approach you? Now, okay, maybe not a stranger, but somebody who, let's say you just started at a new job, or you just started in a new, you're going to class and you're meeting people. Do you hate when people ask you about your disability? Do you like it? How do you like to be approached?
Most things contextual, but I think as a survival skill growing up, I tend to know how to broach it myself. I'll tend to make very tropey jokes at the beginning, like, oh, like the world's made for tall people. Can you hand me that? Because I can't reach it. Or, things like that kind of put them at ease. Comedy puts people a little at ease, and then they start asking questions. They're like, well, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And, for adults, they're usually very like reserved and like, I don't know what to say. But kids are usually the best, because they're like, my cousin who's, I think she's 4 now. She's just started like asking all these questions. She's like, how do you sleep, Liz? And I was like, yeah, just like you. And she's like, but you're in your chair. How do you get into bed? And she's just like asking all these questions that people, I'm sure adults wonder. They're like, how does this person do that? but they're like, oh, I'm not going to ask that. I mean, they're probably weird if I had an adult ask me how I sleep. You know,
I mean, just met them, probably.
But generally, I'm usually pretty open to people asking questions, especially if we're coworkers, someone I have to see all the time. Better you ask than don't know. So
thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was assuming that you would feel the same as I do, and that's very much what I preach as well. Is that if you're not talking about it and not asking me questions, that's making it something that's shameful when it's not something that's shameful.
And so people tend to assume the wrong things.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
People tend to assume the wrong things. So it's very much like it's still a thing we have to work on, but it's getting better. But I know disabled people who don't really like it so much, and so they're usually more self-conscious about themselves and don't know how to kind of what place they have in the world. So me being me, I tend to be like, especially if there's a new person at hockey, I'm like, so what's your disability? And they're like, and so, you know, trying to get them a little more comfortable, but it's all about perceived normality, I suppose. You know, how normal do you feel? I feel fine.
Yes. And that's really, I like that verbiage. I talk a lot about wanting to normalize disability, and I get in trouble for saying that because people say, well, Nikki, you are normal. Stop using that terminology. But it's not normal to talk about it. It's not casual to have these conversations. And I want it to be casual to have these conversations. So thank you for sharing your insight on that. I definitely
and I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah. It's normal for me, so it should be for you. You know, my brothers are completely normalized with me. Like, my brother will even yell in the grocery store, like, jokes about me in my wheelchair just to see people freak out. Like, it's just a game to us now, you know.
Who can, like, shock the other one?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I remember when we were kids, we had a Dollar General store, and I had a couple wheelchairs, and we'd always take me and, like, a couple of his friends, and we go into Dollar General with a couple kids a kid in a wheelchair, and then me, and then we'd have a different kid in a different wheelchair come out. So they switched in the store, so the cashiers were always like, did that kid's walking now? But he was just in a wheelchair. Okay.
But they were too polite to ask questions or yell or do. That's actually really fun.
It's pretty great.
Or brothers and I would get along. My siblings always, they would name my arm. They would give it a name. They would fight over what the name should be or what it would be. So,
was it a name you liked, or did
you say it again?
Was it a name you liked or didn't like?
The one that really kind of stuck was Wormy, and I mean, I guess that's not super insulting. It's not super either. I don't know. But it was always done like you're talking about your brothers in a very loving way, in a way that's very casual. And you know, it's the second anyone would say anything to me, they would be first to stand up on my behalf and defend or educate whoever the person was about the difference. So it's funny to hear insight of other siblings because I very much also feel that.
Like, I could go up to a stranger and be like, can you help me with this? And they'd be like, of course. And my brothers would be like, get yourself.
Yeah, it's true. It's so true.
I'm like, I think I say this to my boyfriend all the time. Like, when we're like play joking, I'll be like, can you get that? And he's like, you get it. I'm like, but I'm disabled. And I'll like give that like whine.
How dare you? How dare you? Oh my gosh, I love it. Listen, Liz, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out with me. It's always a blast to hang out with you, even when we're like in the same city, in different places in the city. So thank you again. This is Liz David. I'm going to put up her social media stuff again. Liz obviously is an amazing speaker. So if you are ever looking for someone, girl's got it going on, please reach out and find her. She's great. And I would like to thank Public House Media as well. for allowing us to be on their channel. And you should definitely join us next week, because I have my awesome friend Adam Ballard coming in, and he actually is going to go through the basics of the ADA with us. He's going to break it down, and he is going to chat us through the whole thing. It is going to be incredible. He's one of my favorite mentors in the entire world, so I'm so stoked to have him on the show. Please join us next week. Thank you again for having us. Again, my name is Nicole Kelly. Stay loud and stay proud.